PHN 1, the blink. So Donald Trump just muscled the one partner he thought he could bully without consequence right out in the open with a grin on camera. And for the first time in his political life, he blinked. But here's the thing. The damage is already done. We are watching the complete collapse of a tough guy oil blockade stunt, a swagger move designed for TV that was doomed from the start. The White House operated on the arrogant assumption that Venezuela would fold the moment the cameras turned on and the threats got louder. They banked everything on the idea that fear alone would force Caracas to beg to flinch to accept humiliation as policy. But guess what? That gamble has backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Instead of submission, Trump has been met with a wall of cold, hard competence, the kind that doesn't care about his tantrums. And it has exposed his operation as chaotic, unprepared, and completely out of its depth because improvisation is not strategy. It's honestly hard to believe he thought this would work, like the world is still stuck in his reality TV set. We are talking about a critical oil state, global shipping lanes, and enforcement choices that ripple far beyond one man's ego trip. This isn't just about one tanker and one headline. We are talking about the United States proving to the world that its word no longer means anything because Trump treats commitments like props. Let me fill you in on what's been happening. So let's look at the setup here. PHN2, the setup. Trump came back to power carrying the same obsession he always carries. He must prove America first by picking a fight big enough to look like destiny. He didn't return to govern, he returned to dominate. And the easiest stage for that kind of domination is a place where Americans won't immediately see the costs. Trump doesn't have the data. Trump doesn't have the plan. Trump has grievance and the hunger to escalate. He wants headlines that sound like control. He wants a show of force that distracts from the boring reality of governing. To rally Trump's base, he needed a villain on cue, a target people could boo without thinking. So he reached for Venezuela, not because Venezuela suddenly changed, but because it was convenient, combustible, and distant enough for MAGA Republicans to treat like a prop. Oil makes it even easier. Oil turns policy into a lever. Oil turns a headline into a threat. Whether it was tariffs waived like a club or allies insulted like servants or institutions threatened until they bent the script is always the same. Threaten first, demand concessions next, humiliate publicly at the end, and Trump loyalists clap because humiliation looks like winning when you've been trained to confuse cruelty with competence. But this time that assumption was wrong. They knew he would come back. They knew he would be aggressive. And they built a strategy designed to neutralize his chaos with boring, relentless stability. They anticipated the rhetoric, the escalation, the emergency language, the fake certainty, and instead of panicking, they built lanes, shipping routes, legal defenses, diplomatic messaging, and a plan to make Trump's move look like what it is, a tantrum with uniforms. Trump escalated and expected the usual scramble to the table, the usual pleading for a deal, the usual photo op where he plays the savior. Instead, the response was cold and procedural. The U.S. Coast Guard boards a tanker, the Pentagon quietly backs it up, and the White House tries to brand it as righteous enforcement. Kristi Noem blasts out a dramatic video, because of course she does, and suddenly the policy becomes content. But then the details land. The vessel isn't even under U.S. sanctions. It's flagged under another country, and it's carrying Venezuelan oil headed toward Asia. That's when the mask slips. This is not careful law enforcement. This is power theater. And when Venezuela frames it as theft and promises to push the fight into global forums, Trump's White House doesn't look powerful. It looks reckless. And while Trump plays pirate president for the cameras, real people get trapped in the spillover. Dock workers hear the rumors first. Refineries feel it next. Freight rates and insurance chatter start climbing in the background. Then come the quiet freezes, delayed orders, cautious overtime managers telling people to wait and see. Job security gets threatened because Trump decided his ego needed an oil crisis and because he thinks chaos is a form of leadership. PHN3, the pattern. At first glance, this looks like just another clash of personalities. But if you zoom out, a very specific pattern snaps into focus. Mike Pence walked into Trump's orbit with discipline, loyalty, and the willingness to stand next to him when the screaming got loud, even when it was humiliating. He defended Trump in public, smiled through the chaos, and carried the weight of the administration like a man trying to keep the wheels on. Then the decisive moment came when Pence refused to do the one thing Trump wanted most, cross a constitutional line just to protect Trump's pride. That refusal was not drama. It was a boundary. Trump does not tolerate limits. He turned on Pence, unleashed public pressure, and signaled to Trump's base that obedience matters more than duty. He isolated him, he poisoned him, and he treated a loyal vice president like a disposable traitor. The second reality interrupted the fantasy. The message was clear. Loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. Bill Barr arrived as a conservative's conservative, the kind of attorney general who speaks the language of order and expects respect for institutions. He gave Trump cover, absorbed blows, and tried to keep the Justice Department from becoming a pure weapon of personal revenge. Then the decisive moment came when Barr refused to pretend the law is whatever Trump says it is, refused to bless claims that didn't hold up, refused to turn prosecution into a loyalty test. He refused the cheap miracle. He refused the lie with a badge on purpose. Trump does not tolerate limits. He attacked Barr, mocked him, and made sure Trump loyalists understood the rule: you exist to serve, not to judge. He pushed him out of the inner circle, smeared his credibility, and rebranded a longtime ally as an enemy simply because Barr wouldn't cross the line. The message was clear: loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. Mark Esper stepped in as a military-minded cabinet official, serious, disciplined, and initially willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. He tried to translate Trump's impulses into something that looked like policy, something that wouldn't crack the country's norms in a single night. Then the decisive moment came when Esper refused to treat the military as Trump's personal crowd control tool, refused to blur the line between national defense and domestic intimidation. He refused to turn uniforms into campaign scenery. Trump does not tolerate limits. He humiliated Esper, undermined him in public, and made it clear that professionalism is a liability in Trump's world. He boxed him out, replaced competence with loyalty, and taught every watcher in Washington the same lesson: boundaries are punished, not respected. The message was clear: loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. John Kelly entered Trump's White House as the kind of staffer Republicans love to romanticize: strict, disciplined adult in the room, the man who could supposedly manage the chaos. He tried to impose order, tried to build guardrails, and tried to stop Trump from treating the presidency like a personal weapon. Then the decisive moment came when Kelly refused to normalize behavior that would rot the institution from the inside, refused to pretend cruelty is strategy, refused to bless the strongman fantasy. He drew a line that wasn't about policy. It was about legitimacy. Trump does not tolerate limits. He turned Kelly into a target, a cautionary tale, a name to be dismissed and mocked the moment the guardrails became inconvenient. He pushed him away, replaced restraint with flattery, and showed MAGA Republicans that anyone who slows Trump down becomes the enemy. He didn't just punish the boundary, he punished the idea of boundaries. The message was: clear loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. Once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. Anyone who refuses to cross the line is disposable, and that is the rule governing power inside Trump's world. PH4, the no-win box. Trump has a talent for moral inversion. He takes an ally or a basic rule of the system and recasts it as an enemy the moment it refuses to serve his personal interests. That's what you're watching in the Caribbean right now. Venezuela isn't being treated like a sovereign country with disputes and diplomacy. It's being treated like a stage prop, a villain cutout to rally Trump's base. And the moment anyone says there are limits, Trump flips the script and screams betrayal, because in Trump's world, the only moral principle is obedience. Here's what makes this so dangerous. One side is trying to live inside rules. The other side treats rules like drywall. International norms, sanctions, frameworks, maritime enforcement standards, diplomatic channels, all of it exists to prevent exactly this kind of impulsive power grab. But Trump looks at that architecture and sees an obstacle course. He wants to smash it because if the rules don't guarantee him a win, then the rules are rigged and MAGA Republicans cheer while the guardrails crack. That's why the White House can announce a blockade like it's a slogan and then celebrate seizures like it's a sports highlight. This isn't careful policy. It's a strongman fantasy performed in uniform. And the moment you perform power like that, the world responds the way the world always responds, by protecting itself. If a tanker isn't under U.S. sanctions and it still gets boarded and seized, every shipping operator hears the same message. Your paperwork will not save you if Trump wants a headline. Your flag will not protect you if Trump wants a message. And when the cargo is Venezuelan oil headed toward Asia, everybody understands the real audience for the stunt. It's not Caracas, it's Beijing. Trump is trying to squeeze China without admitting he's scared of confronting China directly, so he grabs the nearest lever and pretends it's genius. And then Iran steps in with solidarity, because of course it does. Suddenly you're not just playing with Venezuela. You're lighting signals across a region where every rival of the United States is watching how casually Trump treats escalation. Caracas calls it piracy. Washington calls it enforcement. And the rest of the world hears one thing: America's power is being used as a personal weapon, not a national instrument. Now watch the market reaction, because markets don't care about Trump's feelings. Shipping companies don't need a press conference to feel risk, they price it. Insurers don't need a rally, they read signals. Traders don't need a slogan, they watch volatility and they hedge. Businesses don't need a chant, they look for stability, and Trump sells instability like it's patriotism. Think about that. In the real economy, chaos is a tax. It becomes hesitation, delay, cost, and anxiety that spreads quietly through supply chains, from ports to refineries to trucking routes to payroll decisions. And when Trump plays with oil flows, the stress does not stay offshore. And this is where the core lie collapses. Trump's brand is the economic strongman, the guy who claims he can bully the world into lower prices and better deals. But this move is the opposite of strength. It's risk creation. It's a self-inflicted shock built for cable news, not for governing. When a White House celebrates boarding ships like it's a movie trailer, it tells every serious actor on earth that America's enforcement power is being used as campaign content. It tells allies that commitments can be rewritten overnight. It tells rivals that the United States can be baited into escalation by ego. And it tells investors that the adult supervision is gone. That is not leadership. That is vandalism wearing a flag. Now comes the no-win box, and Trump put himself in it. A, if Trump escalates, he lights a fuse under business confidence, donors who hate uncertainty, and voters who don't want their paychecks caught in an oil-driven mess. B, if Trump backs down, he loses face, he loses the fear factor, and Trump's base sees the bluff for what it is. And watch what happens inside the GOP when that box tightens. The business wing wants predictability. The national security crowd wants credibility. The moderates want quiet. MAGA Republicans want spectacle. Trump loyalists want the next clip, the next seizure, the next threat, because constant escalation is the only thing that keeps the myth alive. So the party fractures into competing survival instincts, and the country gets stuck inside the fight, not because America needed it, because Trump did. And the moment that becomes visible, the whole strongman image starts to rot from the inside. And while Trump stages his oil drama, ordinary Americans become collateral. Hours get cut when orders get cautious. Overtime disappears when managers get nervous. Families feel it before pundits admit it. That's the real no-win box, Trump's ego or your stability, and it's not even close. And Trump already chose, without asking anyone, PHN5. The system pushes back then. The system enters because Trump can only push chaos so far before institutions are forced to respond. It stops being a political argument and becomes an operational crisis. Maritime enforcement, sanctions, compliance, shipping contracts, and the credibility of American power. The Coast Guard doesn't run on vibes. The Defense Department doesn't run on applause. The trade and energy world doesn't run on slogans. And once Trump drags them into a headline-driven pressure campaign, someone has to decide what the rules are and whether they still mean anything. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Venezuela's oil industry runs through a state company, and American companies operate there only through narrow carve-outs that depend on a predictable sanctions regime. When Trump turns enforcement into improvisation, he doesn't just punish Caracas. He destabilizes the very compliance system that lets U.S. firms operate without becoming a scandal. And when much of that oil ultimately feeds Asian demand, the geopolitical signal is obvious. Trump wants to choke a flow that he thinks ends up helping China. He just doesn't have the courage to say it cleanly, so he swings at whoever is closest. Here's the executive overreach at the center of it. Trump treats emergency like a magic word that dissolves accountability. He leans on executive muscle, uses national security language as cover, and tries to move faster than Congress can ask questions. He announces blockades and pressure campaigns like their personal brands. Then he pairs it with spectacle videos, dramatic language, chest thumping, because the point isn't policy. The point is submission. That's why you see the performance layer. Homeland Security gets involved, leadership posts, dramatic footage, and the seizure gets narrated like a moral crusade. It's the same move every time: turn a complex legal question into a simple loyalty chant. If you question it, Trump calls you weak. If you demand standards, Trump calls you disloyal. And submission is exactly what Trump tries to force when he uses agencies as extensions of his ego. Board a ship, seize a cargo, let the footage circulate, make the world wonder which vessel is next, which flag is safe, which route is now risky. That uncertainty becomes leverage, and Trump loves leverage more than he loves law. Act first, create facts in the water, dare anyone to stop you. But courts don't defer forever, especially when the argument gets too sloppy and the power grab becomes too obvious. Judges can tolerate secrecy when there's a real security basis. They don't tolerate theater dressed up as necessity. Let that sink in. When the government starts treating shipping lanes like a campaign stage, the legal system has to ask whether enforcement is being applied consistently or politically. And the more Trump blurs the line between sanctions enforcement and headline hunting, the more likely it becomes that lawsuits, injunction requests, and compliance challenges start stacking up. Because once private actors start challenging the boundaries, the government has to show its work. And Trump's White House hates showing its work. It prefers asserting, declaring, and moving on because paper trails are where the strongman myth dies. At the same time, the institutional ecosystem around shipping starts reacting. Ports tighten procedures, insurers scrutinize risk language, banks that finance cargoes become more cautious. Companies that don't care about Venezuelan politics care deeply about predictable enforcement because predictable enforcement is what keeps commerce from turning into a hostage situation. When a tanker can be seized even without a clear sanctions hook, the question becomes simple. Is the United States enforcing a framework, or is Donald Trump freelancing with state power? And that's where the narrative cracks for Trump, because even conservative legal voices hate arbitrary power when it looks this naked. You start hearing it from the right rule of law, conservatives, national security professionals, and Republican-leaning business lawyers who understand that randomness is poison. They can defend tough policy. They cannot defend improvisation that makes American authority look like a personal racket. They cannot defend a president who treats enforcement like content and treats uncertainty like a political weapon. Some of them won't say it on camera at first. They'll whisper it in memos, in boardrooms, in quiet interviews because they know Trump retaliates. But the shift is real conservatives who built their identity on law and order can't pretend law and order means whatever Trump wants today. This runs straight into the constitutional axis, executive versus legislature. If a president can escalate maritime seizures and pressure campaigns without meaningful oversight, then Congress becomes a spectator. Separation of powers turns into separation of responsibilities, where Trump grabs the credit and the country eats the risk. Committees demand answers and the White House stonewalls. Briefings get classified and the public is told to trust the same man who lies for sport. And once that line moves, it doesn't move back easily. The domestic fallout is not theoretical. Confidence gets brittle. Investment gets cautious. Prices become jumpy because energy is not a normal commodity. It's a signal. Oil isn't just fuel. It's freight. It's plastics. It's food logistics. It's the invisible cost inside 1,000 boring purchases. Voters don't need a spreadsheet to feel instability. They feel it when a supermarket run feels tighter, when a commute costs more, when a boss starts talking about uncertainty. And they feel it when Trump blames enemies for problems he created on purpose. That's how democratic decay happens, not with one dramatic collapse, but with repeated normalization of executive freelancing. Voters get trained to accept chaos as the baseline. Agencies get trained to anticipate political use, and the next president inherits a system already bent. Zoom out, and the institutional pushback becomes unavoidable. Foreign governments drag the dispute into multilateral forums, companies build workarounds, agencies quietly try to protect themselves from being used as props. And the legal questions keep rising because the deeper Trump goes, the more he turns the presidency into a machine that serves one man instead of the country. So the real question becomes legitimacy. If Donald Trump can use the machinery of the state to stage pressure campaigns for personal political theater, and if MAGA Republicans applaud it as winning, what happens to the presidency as an institution when the next crisis arrives? PHN 6, the verdict. This is no longer just about tankers, trade routes, or Venezuela. This is rules versus power. That's the point. When Donald Trump uses state force to seize oil and broadcast it like content, he is teaching the world a lesson about what America has become under MAGA Republicans. Not reliable, not steady, not serious. Just loud, just reactive, just impulsive, just willing to bend anything that gets in the way of Trump's storyline. And that storyline is always the same. Trump cannot tolerate limits. He hates slowness because slowness creates accountability. He hates constraints because constraints expose his ignorance. He hates process because process requires evidence. He hates diplomacy because diplomacy requires respect. Trump wants speed, dominance, and a clean narrative where he is always the hero and everyone else is always the villain. And when the real world refuses to cooperate, he doesn't adjust. He escalates. That is why a complex sanctions environment becomes a personal pressure campaign. That is why maritime enforcement becomes a photo op. That is why America First turns into America above the rules. Here's what Trump is really doing when he picks a fight like this. He is trying to prove he can control outcomes by force. He is trying to prove he can punish a country's economic lifeline and call it morality. He is trying to prove he can scare private actors, shippers, insurers, banks into behaving the way he wants without ever going through the normal democratic channels. And he's trying to do it while pretending the whole thing is clean, legal, and righteous, even when the details scream improvisation. Now, here is the precedent warning that should terrify anyone who still cares about constitutional government. If this behavior is accepted, it becomes precedent. If it becomes precedent, it doesn't disappear when Trump leaves. If it doesn't disappear, the next president will use it again. And once the tool exists, it will be justified with whatever crisis is convenient, because power always finds a story. Today, it's oil and narco-terrorism language. Tomorrow, it's something else. But the move is the same. Expand executive control, shrink oversight, and dare the public to complain. And then democratic decay speeds up. Norms erode because people get tired. The public gets numb to things that used to be unthinkable. A seizure becomes policy. A threat becomes strength. A violation becomes just politics. That normalization is the real victory Trump is chasing, because once the country is trained to accept chaos, Trump's incompetence stops looking like a scandal. It starts looking like a style, and a style is easier to sell than a plan. Think about how this looks from the outside. Allies watch the United States treat enforcement like a personal weapon and wonder what American commitments are worth. Rivals watch the same behavior and learn exactly how to bait the White House into overreaction. Smaller countries watch and start shopping for alternatives because no one builds their future on a partner that changes rules mid-game. This is not just a Venezuela problem. This is an America credibility problem, and credibility is the currency Trump keeps spending. And don't miss the quiet cruelty in it. Trump turns distant conflict into a domestic loyalty test. He demands that Americans cheer the seizure, cheer the threat, cheer the escalation, because cheering is how Trump measures legitimacy. If you ask whether it's lawful, you're labeled weak. If you ask whether it's smart, you're labeled disloyal. That is how MAGA Republicans turn citizenship into fandom. Meanwhile, the actual governing problems pile up. How do you keep sanctions credible if enforcement looks selective? How do you keep trade stable if every week brings a new stunt? How do you keep your own agencies respected if they're dragged into propaganda battles? Those questions don't go away. They get worse, and they drag everyone down with them. Now, bring it back to popular politics, where myth meets rent and groceries. Voters reward stability.